Night falls heavy over the Texas plains. February 1943. A cold wind sweeps across the quiet freight yard of Amarillo, where an American military train stands ready. Inside its steel wagons lie crates marked medical supplies. In truth, they hold something far more dangerous: munitions bound for the Pacific. At 2:17 a.m., the silence fractures. A flash tears open the darkness. The blast ripples through the rails, shattering windows 10 miles away. The fire paints the sky red, a color no soldier ever forgets. Within minutes, investigators find twisted steel, burned fabric, and one strange detail: a small white brooch shaped like a nurse's cross, lying in the ash beside a melted rail. No one knows yet how it got there, or that this single piece of jewelry would expose one of the most daring German intelligence operations ever attempted on American soil, because the real weapon that night wasn't hidden in a crate. It smiled, it listened, and it wore a nurse's uniform. By 1943, the United States had become the arsenal of democracy. Every day, thousands of trains thundered across the country, hauling tanks from Detroit, bombs from Pennsylvania, rations from Chicago, and young soldiers from every small town toward coastal embarkation points. Steel on steel was the rhythm of America's war. But behind that confident rhythm ran a constant unease. Only a year earlier, German U-boats had prowled the Atlantic so close to American shores that their periscopes were spotted off Long Island. In Washington, the FBI's Domestic Security Division warned that the next enemy strike might not come from the sea, but from within. The U.S. home front was vast and porous. Millions of new workers poured into shipyards and depots. Blackout drills became routine in coastal states. Posters shouted, "Loose lips might sink ships." Yet few realized that those same lips could also derail a train. Across the ocean, the Abwehr, Nazi Germany's military intelligence service, had changed its methods. After early failures, Admiral Wilhelm Canaris ordered a quieter campaign: gather information, sabotage logistics, and strike at morale. Instead of soldiers, he sent merchants, waiters, technicians, and nurses, people who could move unnoticed among Allied citizens. German agents exploited every overlooked route. Some arrived through neutral Latin America. Others slipped ashore from U-boats disguised as wreck survivors. They brought forged papers, microdot cameras, and coded phrases hidden in letters home. Their targets were simple but devastating: power plants, factories, bridges, and rail lines carrying war material westward. The Bureau of Investigation, later renamed the FBI, uncovered several of these plots. Operation Pastorius in 1942 had already exposed 8 German saboteurs who landed by submarine and carried explosives disguised as shaving kits. All were captured, 6 executed. Yet for every failure the Abwehr recorded, another recruit emerged, often a face no one would suspect. Among the thousands who volunteered as nurses for the Red Cross and military hospitals, a few were something else entirely. They moved with compassion, spoke fluent English, offered comfort to wounded men, and quietly gathered fragments of information. Departure schedules, cargo manifests, the names of officers in charge of transport. The American public never saw them. The military hardly noticed them. But within secret war rooms in Berlin, their reports guided the next waves of sabotage. By early 1943, U.S. counterintelligence had intercepted fragments of a new Abwehr order. Prioritize disruption of continental transport. Hospitals and relief services offer ideal cover. No one yet knew how literal those words would become, because somewhere between New York and Mexico, a woman already carried that order in her memory, folded neatly behind a gentle smile and a nurse's badge. Her name rarely appeared in the records. In Abwehr files, she was listed only as Heike 47. To the men who met her, she was Anna Klein, a soft-spoken nurse with honey-colored hair and an accent faint enough to pass as Swiss. Before the war, Anna had trained at a Red Cross hospital in Hamburg. Her calm hands and fluent English drew attention, not only from doctors, but from recruiters of Germany's expanding intelligence corps. The Abwehr had learned something the Gestapo often ignored, that wars were not only won by guns, but by the power of presence. And Anna's presence could silence suspicion like a lullaby. She was approached in late 1941 after Hitler's declaration of war on the United States. Her assignment: infiltrate the growing Allied medical logistics chain through Mexico, where sympathizers and German expatriates quietly assisted the Reich's operations. There, disguised as a volunteer nurse assisting wounded merchant sailors, Anna learned the routines of American field medics, their forms, their shipments, their trust. By 1942, she crossed the border into Texas with new credentials: American Red Cross Relief Division, medical aid for war casualties. Her uniform was genuine, her identification forged with precision. The war had created a desperate need for nurses. Few questions were asked. Her work placed her along military rail routes, convoys carrying wounded men from Gulf ports to inland hospitals. To her patients, she was kindness in motion. To her handlers in Mexico City, she was a lifeline of intelligence. In coded letters written on children's stationery, she described schedules, cargo volumes, and security gaps. American rail transport was a living artery, and Anna was learning where it pulsed the weakest. She noted which trains ran with minimal guards, which used civilian depots, which carried munitions under false labels to avoid drawing enemy attention. Her method was simple and devastatingly effective: charm, listening, familiarity. She laughed at jokes, remembered names, and once danced with a young rail sergeant during a canteen fundraiser. He never knew she watched him write down next week's cargo details on a clipboard. Each report Anna sent back to the Abwehr was short, coded, and clinical. But by early 1943, one stood out: routine medical convoy departing Amarillo, Aero 2, Suhi, classified crates beneath Red Cross seal. Berlin saw opportunity. Within weeks, a second operative had placed a small device, disguised as a medical oxygen regulator, among the crates she'd described. The nurse's task was complete: to ensure that cargo boarded, untouched. She never held a weapon, never lit a fuse. She simply smiled, checked her patients, and waved the train away under the dim lantern light of a Texas yard. That train would never reach its destination. The human weapon war reshapes everything, even the meaning of kindness. In Berlin's intelligence academies, the Abwehr taught that the most effective spy was not the one who could kill, but the one who could make others feel safe. They studied psychology as carefully as they studied explosives. Agents learned posture, tone, scent, timing, the unspoken art of lowering defenses. By 1942, the Abwehr's Section 2, the Sabotage Division, began recruiting women specifically trained in emotional manipulation. They were nurses, secretaries, translators. Their value wasn't their weapon skill, but their ability to blend into the ordinary hum of Allied life. Anna Klein was one of dozens trained under this doctrine. In the training compound near Oranienburg, instructors called it Gefühlswaffe, the emotional weapon. The principle was cruelly elegant: empathy as camouflage. Her instructors tested everything: how long she held eye contact, the tilt of a smile, even the pause before answering a question. They understood that charm was chemistry. It built loyalty faster than ideology ever could. When she arrived in Texas, Anna didn't need a pistol or codebook. She needed conversation. She offered soldiers cigarettes, asked about their homes, listened when others were too busy. She laughed easily, not flirtatiously at first, but warmly, as if she saw the human beneath the uniform. To men far from home, that was a rare kind of comfort. But her kindness was not aimless. Each interaction served a pattern. She gauged who spoke freely, who drank too much, who carried keys or memorized train schedules. The Abwehr had taught her to extract facts without ever appearing curious. Her most infamous technique, later described by interrogators as the flirty trick, was not overt seduction. It was an illusion of shared vulnerability. She would drop a glove, blush at her mistake, apologize softly. The gesture disarmed tension. In that small, human moment, the man across from her would relax, and the conversation would open like a door. Those brief exchanges yielded priceless fragments. A date, a name, a number on a form. To the men she met, it was nothing. To Berlin, it was everything. Psychologists later studying the case noted how her behavior matched early intelligence manuals. The best deception mimics genuine emotion so closely that even the deceiver begins to believe it. And perhaps that was the tragedy of Anna Klein, that somewhere between duty and deception, she began to live her disguise. She wrote once in a coded letter recovered after the war, "I have become what they wanted. And yet, I no longer know who that is." In the quiet spaces between missions, she still tended real wounds, still wiped real tears. But each act of mercy was now tethered to an act of war. The tactical web, the U.S. rail network of 1943, was more than transportation. It was the lifeline of a global war. Every shell, every ration, every letter crossed steel tracks before it ever crossed the ocean. More than 95% of all military freight in the United States moved by rail. That made those rails the soft underbelly of American power. The FBI knew it. The Office of Defense Transportation knew it. But with millions of tons of cargo moving daily, security was thin and stretched. Each yard depended on local guards, volunteers, and overworked railway police. A single piece of misdirection could open an entire route to disaster. For German intelligence, that vulnerability was irresistible. In late 1942, the Abwehr created a new focus group, Sabotage Gruppe West. Their mission: exploit the long supply lines feeding U.S. forces through the Gulf ports and western states. They sought anything that could cripple logistics without alerting Washington to a coordinated campaign. Anna Klein's reports from Texas arrived at precisely the right time. Through her coded letters, Berlin learned of a medical supply route operating under minimal escort, often departing under Red Cross markings. It was the perfect disguise. The Americans would never suspect that a train bearing the symbol of mercy carried war material, or that one of the nurses on its roster worked for the Reich. Anna's assignments appeared harmless on paper. She inspected cargo manifests, prepared aid kits, logged oxygen tanks and morphine crates. Each item had a serial number, numbers she quietly copied, one by one. Those serials told Berlin which shipments were worth hitting. Her contact in Mexico City, codenamed Otto 9, transmitted those details to Abwehr Command via microfilm hidden in film canisters. The plan that followed was surgical. Replace a single oxygen regulator with a small time delay incendiary, calibrated to ignite near Amarillo, far from cities, minimizing suspicion of deliberate attack. The risk was enormous. German High Command knew America would retaliate harshly if the plot was exposed. Yet the psychological impact of striking U.S. soil, deep inland, was deemed worth the gamble. Anna's role was simple: confirm the departure and the crate's placement. To do that, she relied on the same skill that had kept her invisible: trust. She convinced a logistics sergeant, a man who admired her dedication, to let her personally ensure the oxygen regulators were properly sealed. He thought it was diligence. It was confirmation. That single moment, born of perceived kindness, finalized one of the few successful Axis sabotage operations on American ground during W-Twig. In Washington, the FBI still believed that after Operation Pastorius, the Abwehr had abandoned sabotage entirely. They were wrong. As the train's wheels began turning on that cold February night, Anna Klein stood at the platform, clipboard in hand. No one noticed the faint tremor in her fingers, or that she didn't wave goodbye. The night the rails burned, February 17, 1943, Amarillo, Texas. The yard was half asleep under a frozen wind. The night crew worked by lantern light, their breath hanging in the air like smoke. The medical supply convoy, number 92, was ready for departure. 17 freight cars, 2 passenger coaches, and a Red Cross insignia painted on every door. Anna Klein walked the length of the train with her clipboard pressed to her chest. Her steps were steady, deliberate. No one questioned her presence. Nurses were a familiar sight here, checking cargo before wounded soldiers were transferred west. At 01:45, she paused beside the third freight car, the one marked oxygen equipment. Inside, the crates were stacked neatly, labeled with her handwriting. She adjusted one label, smoothing it down with her palm, and whispered something. Perhaps a prayer. Perhaps nothing. A yard sergeant nearby called out, joking that she should get some rest. She smiled, the same soft smile that had opened so many doors. Just making sure everything's in order, she said. By Oro-Tutan, the locomotive hissed to life. The whistle cut through the dark, echoing across the plain. Anna stepped back as the wheels began to turn, her face half lit by the lantern's flicker. She held her clipboard tightly, then slowly lowered it to her side. The sound of the departing train grew softer, a steady rhythm fading into the night. She stood motionless long after it was gone. In her mind, she replayed the Abwehr briefing from 2 years earlier. You will act without trace. Your success will be known only to those who listen for silence. For a moment, silence was all that remained. Then, in the distance, the faint rumble of the train mixed with thunder rolling over the plains. Or perhaps something else. In Amarillo, clocks read 2:17 a.m., and in that instant, the silence broke. The fire beneath the flag. The blast struck without warning. At 2:17 a.m., a column of fire erupted along the track, tearing through the freight cars like paper. The Red Cross symbols, once bright white, vanished under sheets of orange flame. Steel rails twisted upward, glowing red against the night. The concussion shattered windows in Amarillo's outskirts. Farmers miles away saw the sky ignite and thought the war had reached them. Fire crews arrived within minutes, but the inferno consumed everything. The medical convoy burned for hours, ammunition exploding in bursts that echoed like artillery. When dawn came, nothing recognizable remained except warped wheels, fragments of crates, and the faint outline of a cross seared into one surviving wagon door. By mid-morning, military investigators and FBI field agents cordoned off the area. Their first reports were confused: a fuel leak, a brake spark, perhaps sabotage. But one discovery stopped them cold. Among the blackened gravel near the third car, an investigator found a melted piece of jewelry, a small white brooch, its enamel cross still faintly visible. At first, no one understood its significance. It was logged, photographed, and set aside. Yet, when they began interviewing personnel connected to the shipment, one name surfaced repeatedly: Nurse Anna Klein. The woman who had inspected the oxygen crates. The FBI's local office in Dallas ordered her detained for questioning. But when agents arrived at her quarters near the Red Cross dormitory, the room was empty. Her suitcase was gone, her bed untouched. The only trace she left was a torn page from a medical ledger, folded beneath her lamp, with a single handwritten line. The wounded sleep. I must keep them safe. For investigators, it read like guilt disguised as devotion. Within hours, Washington declared the explosion an act of enemy sabotage. Internal memos warned, "The enemy has found a way inside our borders." Across the Atlantic, in Berlin, a single coded message was received that same day. Train 92. Success confirmed. But the victory was hollow. The Abwehr would soon learn that the explosion they celebrated had not only destroyed American cargo, it had exposed one of their most effective agents. The hunt for the nurse, the explosion at Amarillo, was more than a local tragedy. It was a wake-up call to a nation that believed its distance from Europe made it untouchable. By the morning of February 18, 1943, the site had become a restricted zone. Army engineers, ordnance experts, and FBI investigators sifted through the wreckage under armed guard. Their findings confirmed the unthinkable. Traces of a high-yield German compound, nipolite, the same explosive used in Axis submarine sabotage charges. Within 48 hours, the Bureau's Washington headquarters released a coded nationwide alert. Female suspect, medical affiliation, fluent in English and German, likely trained by foreign intelligence. For the first time since Operation Pastorius, the United States admitted that Nazi espionage had breached its interior. The press was silenced. Censors blocked coverage, citing national security. But rumors spread through telegram offices and base canteens. Whispers of a German nurse who blew up a hospital train. The story grew in the shadows. Half-truth and fear intertwined. FBI agents retraced Anna Klein's path across the Southwest. They questioned station masters, Red Cross officials, and wounded servicemen who'd known her. Every description matched. Polite, gentle, always taking notes. Yet she was always one step ahead. In Laredo, a Border Patrol officer reported seeing a woman matching her likeness boarding a freight truck bound for Mexico. Days later, an informant in Monterrey described a foreign nurse seeking passage toward Veracruz, a known hub for German couriers operating under diplomatic cover. Washington feared she might slip onto a neutral ship bound for Spain. Operation Southern Net was launched, a quiet collaboration between the FBI, OSS, and Mexican authorities. They scanned port manifests, intercepted radio frequencies, even raided German-owned pharmacies suspected of harboring agents. But Anna remained invisible. To the intelligence community, she became a ghost, a symbol of the new war America had to fight, not on beaches or battlefields, but in the hearts of its own cities and towns. Every nurse, every volunteer, every foreign accent was now viewed with suspicion. The trust she had weaponized was collapsing everywhere she had passed. Echoes of the betrayal. For months after the Amarillo blast, the hunt continued. The FBI's case file, labeled German Operative 47, medical cover, expanded to hundreds of pages, full of witness statements, telegram intercepts, and decoded fragments. Yet the suspect herself was never found. Whether Anna Klein escaped or perished remains a matter of debate. Some reports suggested she boarded a neutral freighter out of Veracruz under forged Swiss documents. Others hinted that she never made it past the Mexican border, dying anonymously of fever in a remote clinic. The Abwehr's post-war archives offered only one chilling entry beside her code number. Mission complete. No further contact. For American intelligence, her disappearance was an open wound. The FBI's director, J. Edgar Hoover, quietly expanded domestic counter-espionage under what became known as Program R3, a surveillance initiative targeting medical and humanitarian sectors of national transport. Hospitals, Red Cross depots, and rail depots now fell under military watch. Every volunteer nurse underwent background checks. It was a silent transformation of the American home front. The same symbol that once stood for mercy, the Red Cross, now carried the shadow of suspicion. In 1944, an internal OSS memorandum analyzed the Amarillo case as a textbook lesson in psychological infiltration. It concluded that Compassion can serve as the perfect camouflage when war demands only efficiency. The report circulated quietly among Allied intelligence schools, influencing post-war counterintelligence doctrine well into the Cold War, but beyond the agencies and files, the human toll remained. 76 soldiers and workers had died in the explosion. Families received no official explanation, only folded flags and a phrase stamped on every telegram: "Killed in line of duty." Years later, after the war ended, the site was rebuilt into a freight depot again. No memorial marked the ground. Only old railmen remembered the night when the sky turned red and spoke of the mysterious nurse who had once walked those tracks. She had vanished, but her legacy endured. A reminder that in a war of weapons and ideology, the deadliest attacks often began with a smile and a helping hand. The smile that burned a nation. History remembers the great battles: Normandy, Stalingrad, Midway, places where the sky itself seemed to catch fire. But wars are also fought in whispers, in a handshake, in a gaze that lingers 1 second too long. Anna Klein's story survives only in fragments: coded messages, missing reports, a melted brooch. Yet through those fragments we glimpse something larger than espionage. We see how easily war corrupts the gentlest parts of humanity. She was trained to heal, not to harm, to comfort, not to deceive. And yet, in the hands of her superiors, that same compassion became a weapon sharper than any blade. The Abwehr understood a truth that still haunts modern warfare. When you can no longer win with bullets, you turn to belief. You manipulate trust. On that cold February night, the explosion in Texas destroyed more than munitions. It shattered a nation's sense of safety, and its belief that kindness could exist without suspicion. In the aftermath, every smile was questioned. Every volunteer's accent weighed like evidence. We often imagine spies as silhouettes in alleyways, codebooks in hand. But Anna's weapon was her humanity, the very thing war is supposed to defend. In the years after 1945, the lessons drawn from her mission shaped the DNA of Western intelligence. Background checks, psychological profiling, and emotional conditioning all trace their origins to the realization that the enemy could wear a uniform of mercy. No court ever judged her. No grave bears her name. But her act became immortal in another way, as a quiet warning whispered across every generation that follows. The moment war teaches us to doubt compassion, it wins twice, because sometimes the deadliest battles aren't fought with guns or planes, but with trust and the hands that once promised to heal.